Today, I'm delighted to welcome Nicole Weber of Quality Matters Consulting from Bundjalung Country in the Northern Rivers of New South Wales. I met Nicole last year and had the good fortune to experience 2 of her wonderful workshops that she ran for not-for-profit groups on governance and also volunteer engagement and retention. I was blown away by her knowledge and experience. Nicole is a JP consultant, coach and chair of the Northern Rivers Community Foundation. She has worked both alongside and within not-for-profit groups, which is why we thought she would be a wonderful choice for today. And given that this session is oversubscribed, I think we might have been right. Thank you, Nicole, for enabling this session today. Over to you.
Oh, thanks so much, Gillian, and it's terrific to be with you all. Thank you so much for registering and joining. So I would also like to pay my respects. I do come from, I'm on Bundjalung country right now, and I'd like to pay my respects to the traditional custodians, not only of this land, but of all of the lands that we have the privilege to work and travel on. I am grateful for their continued custodianship and care of these lands, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and those who are emerging in our communities. So welcome to our presentation today. We're going to talk about strategic planning for small organisations. If at any time you've got questions, concerns, please use the chat function if you know how to do that, and just pop a note into there, and the wonderful folks from FRRR will keep an eye on that and just flag for me if there's anything that has popped up as an urgent question. At the end, I'll make sure that there's an opportunity to ask questions as well, and to share ideas. And in a moment, I'll be asking you about where you're at in terms of your strategic planning as well. So let's have a look at what we're going to cover in the workshop that we've got today. I'm going to talk a little bit about why it's important to have a strategy or a strategic plan. We're going to talk a bit about being a values-led organisation. You may have heard of something called a SWOT analysis, and this is a really common tool that is part of strategic planning, really useful tool. So we're going to explore that a little bit. I'm going to talk to you about the key areas in an organisation that are really valuable to plan for, and there's 5 key areas that we're going to cover. I'm going to talk a little bit about writing your plan, and then what happens after you've written a plan. Now, the purpose of today is really to give you a bit of a framework. We're obviously not going to be doing strategic planning, but the idea is to give you a bit of a sense of, how would you go about putting together a strategic plan for your organisation. Now, because this is being recorded, if you are an organisation that doesn't have a strategic plan, and you're a small organisation and want to tackle this yourself rather than getting somebody to come and facilitate a plan for you, then you could step through this recorded session, and it would give you a bit of a guide and a bit of a starting point. So that's kind of the purpose. But it's also, it's a good idea to get you thinking. If you've already got a plan, it could get you thinking about, does that plan meet your needs? Does it cover all the things that could be covered in it? It hopefully gives you a bit of a guide. I've been doing strategic planning within and with, as an external consultant with organisations for quite a number of years. So I've been doing strategic work with organisations for, I want to say, at least 10 to 15 years. And as a consultant for the last 4 or 5 years, facilitating strategic plans. And so this is, this sort of distills together the approach that I would take, the general approach that I would take with any organisation. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to know whether you've got a plan at the moment or not. So we're going to do this fun little poll that I'm going to launch now, and hopefully in a moment you will be able to see it on the screen that you're using. And there we go. I can see people already answering. That's wonderful. Look at you all go. Great. I'll leave this up for a bit longer because we do have about 34 people joined already. And So most of you have answered. All right. I'm going to end the poll. Oh, yep, sorry. I'm going to end the poll there, and I'm just going to share the results with you. And hopefully, can you nod, Gillian, if you can see the results? Not yet? Okay. I'm hoping that they come up in a moment for you. They should come up over the top of the slide that I'm working on. Okay.
Other people are saying that they can see the results. I think it may be because I'm a shared host that I can't see them.
That would be why. Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks, folks. So we can see here that that there are a bunch of organisations who do have a current strategic plan, which is great. Slightly more have a plan, but it's out of date. And then there are some organisations, so there's about 50% of you either have a plan that's current or it's out of date. Nearly 40% don't have a plan, and about 7% don't know. And that could be because of your role in the organisation, or it could be because it's not something that's come up for discussion. So thanks so much. That's terrific information. It really helps me to know where everybody is at. It's really common for, sorry, let me just get out of that and go back to share my screen. It's really common for organisations to have a strategic plan that falls out of date. And it may be, when we talk about it being out of date, it might be that the time frame has run out, or it may be that you've realised because of COVID, natural disaster, you know, a whole lot of things, that it's actually no longer fit for purpose. So it's important, and we're going to talk about the importance of, you know, that a strategic plan is a living document. It's not a document that you create at a point in time and then file away electronically or pop it in a folder and allow it to gather dust. It's really important that we look at ways of, you know, how do you embed your plan in what you do every day in your organisation so that it really helps you to get the results that you're looking for. And so that takes me to the purpose of actually having a plan. So a strategic plan is your compass. It's kind of your guiding light, and it allows you, gives you a roadmap. It gives you a clear sense of where you want to head and where you need to put your energy and what you need to do to achieve your goals as an organisation. And what's the quote? It says something like, you know, a goal without a plan is a wish, I think is the quote. And so, you know, we want to make sure that, you know, a plan gives us that structure, and it helps us really work out where do we put our time and our resources and our energy, and that's really important. We understand how busy organisations are and how busy people are in organisations, and without a plan, then it's very difficult to make some of those decisions, particularly on the fly. So benefits of having a strategy: it gives you a roadmap. It gives you a very clear sense. It also, that roadmap is shared. So it gives you a sense of collectively as an organisation where it is that you want to go to and how you plan to get there, what your timeframes are for that, and who's going to be responsible for which particular actions. It helps you make decisions and focus your energy. One of the things that I always encourage people to think about, particularly managers, general managers, CEOs, and boards who are really operationally focused and work very operationally, I always encourage them, whenever they're coming to a decision about what to do with their time and their energy, that they think about their plan. What does your strategic plan tell you? So that's a really good test. It's a good benchmark, and it helps you to make decisions, but it also helps you to communicate those decisions to your stakeholders and to other people. A strategic plan is great for seeking out and assessing opportunities. So again, I often speak to organisations who they might say, oh, we've got this opportunity to apply for this funding, or somebody's approached us with a collaborative opportunity. And I will always say to them, what does your strategic plan say about that? Because it can be really tempting, particularly in the not-for-profit space, to just grab opportunities as they present themselves. But if that organisation or that funding isn't aligned with your values, isn't aligned with your purpose, isn't aligned with the goals of what you want to achieve, chances are it will swallow up more time and energy than it will give you back. And you run the risk of having a really scattered energy situation, and we want to avoid that. A strategic plan also can help you secure funding and other resources. So a great example is if you're looking to borrow money, organisations often, will go and apply for a loan to purchase property, for example, or if you are looking for grants and that sort of thing, if you can show how it fits into your strategic plan, how whatever it is that you're applying for the funding for, how it fits, and that you have a strategy, that's really going to help in terms of setting you up for business success. So whoever you're talking to is going to be impressed by that and say, okay, well, it's clear that they've thought about this. This isn't just a back of a napkin kind of idea that they've had on the spur of the moment. I want to just talk really quickly about stakeholders. So this is about who should be involved in putting together a strategic plan. So when I talk to organisations about strategic planning, there's a real range of responses. So in some organisations, operational staff have sat down, and sometimes it's just the manager who sat down and written a strategic plan. And then the other end of the spectrum is organisations who've involved everybody. So they've just had a free-for-all invitation. There's definitely a sweet spot, and this is going to depend on the nature of your organisation. But what I would encourage you to think about are who are your stakeholders, and they're going to be internal and external. And depending on the size and the scope and the nature of your organisation will depend on who you involve and how. So, for example, if you're a completely volunteer-led organisation and you have a big volunteer base or a medium volunteer base, and those volunteers are responsible for running the organisation as well as delivering the service that you deliver or whatever it is that you do, then you will want to consult those volunteers in some way. Okay, you'll want to get for most organisations, you'll want to get whoever your governance group is. So whether that's a committee or a board, for example, you'll want to get their input. I think that if you're delivering a service to the community, so if you have what we might call service users, clients, participants, it's really useful to get their feedback and input as well. Now, there's lots of different ways. Oh, and then, of course, your internal staff. So if you employ people, then having your staff involved as well. So there's lots of ways that you can get stakeholders involved, and they don't have to be super time consuming. But what is important is that whatever consultation you do, it's genuine. And that applies for everything. Whenever you're going to send a survey to anybody, it needs to be genuine, that you're going to do something with that information. So please bear in mind that you don't want to consult people for the sake of it, to tick a box to say, yes, we asked these people. Whatever the feedback is, that needs to show up in the plan so that people can see that their views were taken on board, providing the feedback that you get is obviously useful feedback. So the different ways that you can consult your stakeholders, you can do a survey, you can hold focus groups. So for example, I've worked in not-for-profits where we had hundreds of clients, service users. So we created a stakeholder representation group, and we invited some people to join that. We had about 15 people, and so we consulted them. We involved the committee or the board in the actual strategic planning event. And we also had some contribution from some staff as well. And we made sure that staff from different areas of the organisation were represented. So stakeholders will depend on the nature of your organisation. It's really important that to get a really well-rounded strategic plan, that you do talk to your stakeholders and get their feedback. The other one I haven't mentioned, is community stakeholders. So do you have collaborations or partnerships with other organisations? do you have organisations in your network that would be great to get feedback from? So, for example, the not-for-profit I mentioned that I worked for, we sought feedback from other organisations who were also in the aged and disability care space in our region. So we invited them as well. We just sent them a survey, and essentially we were asking them things like, what do we do well? What could we do differently? And so there were a few different questions around that. So I'd encourage you to think about who your stakeholders are and how you could genuinely consult them when you're putting together your strategic plan. Okay. Values are your starting point. Okay, now you might be wondering what values have to do with a strategic plan. If your organisation hasn't already articulated what your values are, this is really key. Okay, and that's because this is what you stand for. This is your purpose for existing. And when you know what your values are as an organisation, it will really help you define the direction that you're headed, who you might want to collaborate with, what sorts of things you want to be involved in, and which areas you definitely don't want to be involved in, which is equally critical. Now, many organisations have, you'll notice on this slide, I talked about meaningful values, and I want to explain what I mean by that. If you do a random search of any organisation, particularly, you know, it could be a business or it could be in the not-for-profit space, chances are there's a set of values that are pretty popular, and they're around things like integrity and you know, being ethical and being trustworthy and that sort of thing. Okay, now these are great values. What I'm more interested in is organisations being very clear about what are their core values, and I would recommend no more than 5, and often you can articulate your values in 3 or 4 value statements. But importantly, it's not the upfront word that's at the beginning, so whether that's responsibility or trust or integrity, but it's what does that look like in action. Okay, so one of the things that I encourage organisations to do, if they have the resources, is to get somebody to help them with this little activity, even if you don't have somebody who's facilitating your strategic plan, but if you can get somebody to help you with this, somebody who has really great communication skills and is objective and can help you work out what are your key value statements, okay? And so your key value statements might read something, a really good value statement might read something like, we believe in integrity. This means we admit our mistakes, we fix them, and we make sure we do better in future. Now, that's just off the top of my head, okay? But that statement in itself helps people to understand how will they see you behaving when you talk about integrity. Now, what's super useful about this is it then helps you to manage at all levels of your organisation. So you can then embed that into things like managing staff and volunteers, making decisions about collaborations and partnerships, because you might have somebody come at you from another organisation about a partnership or a collaboration, and you might think, okay, do we see that organisation behaving with integrity in the way that we do, which is, do they admit their mistakes? Do they fix things? And if they don't, then it's a very easy no, thank you. If they do, then it's okay, let's explore this further, okay? I think it's really important that organisations have meaningful values articulated that sit at the base of their strategic plan, because then that really helps with decision making, and it helps to guide what it is that you want to see included in your plan. It also gives you a reference point. I want to give you an example. I worked with an organisation who said that trust was one of their values, and they talked about having trustworthy relationships internally within their team, but also with the community and with the participants. We then talked about the strategic plan, and they said that one of the things that they wanted to implement was a time card system, or a clocking on and clocking off system for their staff. Okay. Now, can you see the challenge here? So on the one hand, they're talking about trust, and they're saying we believe in trust and we're going to be trustworthy and we trust other people. But then they're looking at implementing a system that with their staff that actually sends a message, we're not sure that we trust you because we're going to do a clock on, clock off system. Okay. So it's a great example of how your values give you the opportunity to check back and make sure that, hang on, is what's in our plan actually consistent with our values? Okay. Now we'll talk about SWOT. So we've in our strategic planning process, we've looked at stakeholders. We've thought about who our stakeholders are and who we might want to involve. Now, when it comes to putting together a strategic plan, if you have the resources, I strongly encourage you to get somebody to facilitate your planning day who's external to the organisation. Now, if resources are super challenging, think about, is there another organisation that you could partner with? Do you have somebody in your organisation, whether it's at a board, committee or staff level, who is an excellent facilitator? Does somebody else have the same? And could you do a trade with each other? That's one way to get around that resource issue. But if you have the resources or can get the resources, I strongly encourage investing in a facilitator, simply because they will keep you on track and keep you focused and give you the framework to help you step through this process, okay? So you've got your stakeholders, you've thought about who your stakeholders are and how you're going to involve them. You might have consulted them beforehand. They might be part of the day, however that looks for you. Then you've got your values that you've articulated, so we've got them really clear. The next thing we want to do is we want to assess where you're at right now as an organisation. And this is our SWOT tool: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Okay, we're going to step through each of these for you. So overall, don't worry about this slide too much. I'm actually going to cover these all individually, but this is the whole picture all in one go. Okay. What is good to know is that strengths and weaknesses are internal. So they're the things that's happening inside your organisation. Opportunities and threats are outside your organisation, okay? Now, if you've got a pen and paper handy, as we step through, I would really encourage you, I'm going to take you through each of these 4 areas. I'd encourage you to make a note of 1 or 2 things that, based on the dot points, that jump out for you, for your organisation, so you can kind of apply this in real time. So let's start by talking about strengths. So when we talk about strengths, we want to understand, what is it that you do really, really well? What sets you aside from everybody else out there, okay? And what are the internal resources that you've got? And this could be a whole range of things. This can be about, you know, the skills of your staff. This could be about having amazing relationships and connections in your community and with stakeholders. It could be a whole range of things. It could be the next point here about your assets and resources. Have you got great IT systems? Have you got programs? Have you got things that you've created as an organisation? So what are your assets and resources? And what do you think customers or others would say your strengths are? Now, when it comes to your consultation, you might actually like to do some consultation around SWOT. So you could do a survey and ask people, what do you think our strengths are? What do you think our weaknesses are? Yeah. You might also ask, you know, what do you think some of the opportunities are for us that we might not have explored yet? And depending on which stakeholder you ask, for example, you know, your committee or board, they might have some really good information. You might also have people in the community, partners in the community, who also know about some really interesting stuff that they think you might get involved in. So this is where we look at strengths. So just take a moment, think about your organisation, think about it from top to bottom. So we're looking at from your participants or clients or service users, you know, whoever that might be, to staff and volunteers, management, board or committee, and what are the strengths that sit? And you might be able to list more than 2 things, but write down just 1 or 2 things at least that you think are strengths in your organisation. The next thing we're going to talk about is weaknesses. So it's really important to be very honest about weaknesses. And when you come to do this, don't worry too much about if you make a list and the weaknesses seem really big and overwhelming. That's okay. It's good just to clock, okay, what is it that, is going on here internally? So what are the things that we know that we could do better? Are there things that you get complaints about? Okay, now that's going to happen for every organisation. There's going to be things that you get complaints about. It's important to be honest about this stuff because then you can address it in your plan. Who in the community does what you do but better than you? So what are your competitors doing better than you? And what are some limitations? Okay, now, if I had $1 for every time somebody wrote funding on a Post-it note and stuck it on a bit of butcher's paper in strategic planning, I'd be really, really wealthy. Funding's always going to be a limitation, but think about it more broadly as well. So are there other resource limitations? Okay. And think about things that you can control, because the other one that comes up commonly is people just say time. Okay. So time is not something we can create more of, but what we can do is prioritize differently. All righty. But, try and think really broadly and creatively. And what does your organization lack, but something that it really needs? Okay. So again, think about for your organization, remembering this is internal, this is inside. What are one or two weaknesses that you can think of that might be things that you could tackle in a strategic plan? The next one, now we move to outside. So this is external. So we start with opportunities. So what are things that you're aware of, but you haven't addressed yet that are opportunities for your organization? And what are the things that you know about that are trends or markets that you might be able to tap into? Now, this is always going to be, what's going to suit your organization and what's going to be aligned with your values and your purpose. But it's unusual for organizations for there not to be emerging trends or markets that they would be able to tap into for things that they're not already doing. Partnerships and collaborations, are there any of those that are around that could be developed and created? And if you've already got a number of partnerships and collaborations, and the idea of it's not necessarily about more, it's about value and about richness. So with the partnerships and collaborations that you already have, is there untapped potential even in those? So rather than going off and trying to create even more partnerships and collaborations, could you deepen and broaden those? And is there a way that you could raise the profile of your organisation in your community or in the market that you operate in? So again, one or two examples, if you can think of any, for your organisation. And then the last one in a SWOT are your threats. So again, this is external. So who is your competition? Now, not-for-profits in the past, possibly until, not that long ago, may not have been thinking about competitors. When we had, different funding models, then, we might have thought about competitors for funding, but we didn't really think about competitors for clients or service users or participants. But the market has changed. And not only do we have competitors for the services that we offer, but we've also got competition for things like volunteers and board and committee members. So, there are other organisations that are going to be your competitors. Now, I don't want to say that competition is a bad thing. It's not. And competitors aren't bad. They're not our enemy. We just need to know who they are. Other threats include changes in legislation or compliance that you're not ready for. So if you're aware that there's been recent changes in legislation or there's change coming, so great examples are the Royal Commissions that have happened in the aged care and disability services space. That's brought up some changes in legislation and will bring more. The other one is, in the past 6 months, legislation has changed around work health and safety, in terms of, and this is a really big one for our sector, so the change in work health and safety and the obligations on organisations and boards and committees to make sure that staff and volunteers' psychological well-being is being taken care of. So, that's an area of compliance that we wouldn't necessarily have seen coming, but we need to be aware of those things. Are there external roadblocks that could get in the way of your organisation's success? So have a think about that. And significant changes facing your sector. So there's been an enormous amount of that, and we're now in a situation where we are looking at a much different economy. And so how does that affect your financial viability? So organisations that are really reliant on fundraising, particularly local fundraising, this could become an issue. And obviously, other threats include things like natural disaster that we're all very familiar with. So what are those external things that can really impact your organisation's ability to succeed? So again, make a note for yourself, 1 or 2 things that are examples of threats for your organisation. Okay, so now that we've got all that information, you might have thought that you were planning already, you were preparing for your plan. Now we're actually going to tackle the plan. This is the bit where we actually start pulling all that information together and extending it and starting to think about goals, okay? So this is the sequence that we would generally work in. We think about 5 key areas, and I'm going to introduce you to in just a moment. We review the outcomes of our SWOT analysis, and we pull together any themes that have come up, and we start to group those themes against these 5 key areas. And then we look at creating SMART goals, so over a time period of 1 to 2 years only, and we break down those goals into steps. Now, in the distant past, organisations would have a 3 to 5 year strategic plan. Nowadays, whenever I work with clients, I suggest no more than 3 years for a strategic plan. And it's simply because too much changes. There's just too much going on, and we know that. We know that from a pandemic and multiple natural disasters and sector changes. So 5 years is too long to plan for in this kind of context. 3 years is a much more reasonable time frame. And what it allows you to do is, quite often organisations will do a lot of planning for activities in the first 2 years, and it gives you space to then push things out as needed to adjust. So let's step through this process. The first thing we're going to do is talk about the 5 key areas these are the areas that I recommend planning in. Now, other people who do strategic planning might suggest different areas or call them different things, but these are the 5 that I generally will recommend. So governance and systems is, things like policies. It also includes risk. So how are you making sure that you're compliant and that your organisation is governed well, and you're doing all of the things that you need to do to stay on top of legislation. You've got a good, solid, strong committee or board, those kinds of things. So that's governance and systems. It can also include things like your IT systems, information systems, and platforms and that sort of thing. So governance and systems is one area. Finances, budget, that's another area. So that's a clear one that you'll want to talk about: financial sustainability and viability and goals around finances. And for some organisations, that can just be to continue as they currently are. For others, it may be to grow. And for others, it may be to consolidate and to streamline, what they're doing in terms of their income sources and income streams. Marketing, so how do you promote your organisation and share what you do? And that includes things like social media. It can include things like your website and that sort of thing. It can include, you know, do you have newsletters that go out to, you know, within your organisation, out to the community? Are you part of stakeholder groups, networking groups, that sort of stuff? So that can be quite broad. People is your team. So this is staff and volunteers, essentially. So if you're an organisation who has paid staff, then there'll be some planning that needs to be done around that. And that can be, again, that can be around recruitment, growth. It can be around policies, systems. It can be a whole lot of things. So sometimes you might see some crossover and you might think, we want to implement something that's in relation to people, but it's an IT system. It's really up to you. This is your document. It's a living document. You can decide, does it belong in governance or does it belong in people? And you can work that out. But these are just some high-level topics that give you a guide. And the last one is products and services. So again, depending on what it is that you do as an organisation, this can be service delivery, client services. It can be products. It can be, you know, any number of things. It can be activities. So, for example, if you're an arts organisation, it might not be a product or a service. It might be an activity that you do. And the question here is, where do we want to be in 2 years' time, 2 to 3 years? Okay. So if it is that 2 to 3 years for you feels like too short in terms of planning, you can say, where do we want to be in 5 years? But what do we need to do in the next 2 to 3 years to work our way towards getting there? So if there is a bit of a concern that, you know, 2 to 3 years is not aspirational enough or not big picture enough, that's okay. You can do some big picture goal setting around 5-year time frame. But I strongly encourage you to pull back to 2 to 3 years when it comes to actually planning your activities and what you're going to do to make that happen. Now, it's important that when we set goals that they are SMART goals. I'm sure you would have heard of SMART goals, and here's the little explainer of what they are. So a SMART goal is something that is specific, it's measurable, it needs to be achievable within the resources that you've got. So, you know, if one of your goals is to get to the moon, that could be a goal. How achievable or realistic it is would be questionable, depending on what kind of organisation you are. It needs to be realistic and it needs to be timely or time framed. So it needs to have a time frame attached to it. So I'm going to give you a little example here. So a SMART goal, the first example is not a SMART goal. So we'll operate in a more financially sustainable way is not a SMART goal. The second example is that same thing, but it's made into a SMART goal. So by the end of the next financial year, we'll achieve a 30% increase in grant income. And the reason that it needs to be a SMART goal is so that you can actually track whether or not you're achieving it. And the only way to do that is by having a time frame attached to it and having something that is measurable. Okay, that's your specific measurable. It needs to be realistic and achievable. So within the scope of what you would do. Now, if you said by the end of next financial year, we will quadruple our grant income, depending on your starting point and how you're going to get there, that is going to depend on whether that's realistic and achievable or not. Okay, now you might have some information or some resources that you know actually that is really achievable and realistic. So by all means, that's a great SMART goal. But whatever it is that you're planning, think about it in SMART goals. I'd like you to go back to your SWOT analysis and the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and just take a moment to have a think about what could be a SMART goal. It doesn't have to be a real SMART goal, so it doesn't have to be something that actually relates to where your organisation is at now. It's just a practice, but I want to give you a chance to practice writing a SMART goal. And if we've got anybody who's brave enough, you're welcome to share your SMART goal idea in the chat if you want to check in and see how did I go with my SMART goal? So let's just take 2 minutes to have a crack at writing a SMART goal in relation to a strategy for your organisation. And once you've got something, like I say, if you're happy to and feeling brave, feel free to pop it into the chat to share. And what's helpful about that is that other people can then see examples of SMART goals, because everybody will come up with something that's quite different. Anyone going to be brave and share? Oh, let's see, what have we got? Oh, we've got lots of sharing. Commit to spending 100% of our allocated governance training budget at the end of the financial year to improve our board skills. Beautiful, Julia. That's great. Increase our membership by 20% over the next 2 years. Terrific. By the end of 2023, we'll develop staff induction procedure. Great. Yep, Jill, that's a great starting point. Nice. Completed its production schedule. Lovely, Squid Ink. Nice. Yep, lovely. Increased board membership by 2 members. Yeah, excellent. You're all over it. This is great. Love it. Increased our LinkedIn followers by 150%. Yep, excellent. That's terrific. Thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate that. That's great. Like I said, it's great for people, others to be able to see examples. It'll inspire them as well. So thank you. Thanks for that. All right. So we're coming towards the end of our kind of planning session. So you've got your SMART goal. Then what you want to do is break down each SMART goal into quarterly actions. You want to allocate responsibility to somebody, because somebody's going to have to do the work. And you want to build this into your business as usual and then monitor progress and adjust. So what I mean by build it into business as usual is that you want to be making sure that these goals are really actionable, and because they're broken down, the measures of what you want to achieve by when become part of the work that you do, and you build these into whatever reporting process is appropriate. So in a big organization, a lot of the strategic plan may be very maybe operationalized. So by that I mean it'll be done by people who are paid in paid roles, not done by a committee or a board. Okay. And in those situations, there'll be activities that are delegated, and they might be delegated to frontline staff, to middle leaders, or to managers and senior leaders. Okay. And then what we look at is how do you create a structure that allows reporting on the outcomes of those actions that you've agreed to, so that you can then monitor progress and adjust. Now, in an organisation where you've got not a big team of paid people or no paid people and volunteers, you may just be monitoring these as part of your regular committee or board meetings. Okay, so what I would strongly encourage you to do, include these on your agenda to say, where are we up to in terms of progress against our strategic plan? I'm going to give you 2 examples here. So there's a couple of really simple ways that you can do this breakdown. This is a Word document, and I've created a table for each strategic goal area. So I've given you examples here of marketing and people. We've got all of the quarters that for this plan go over 2 years. and we've broken down the steps. Now, what this really helps you to do is work out what needs to be done first. So what's the order of things, and also what's realistic, because you're also going to be you also want to be thinking about what else is going on in our year. When are the times that we're not going to be able to get much done because we've got other really big operational things, and when are our periods where we've got a bit more opportunity. So for some organisations, January to March is not their busiest time because you know, people are some people take leave, and the manager might work every January and never take leave in that particular time, and so they'll say, well, I'm definitely going to pop some things into January because I know I can get stuff done. July and August are they might be really busy times for you because of post end of financial year, whatever. Okay, so just it allows you to think about how do we timetable this to make sure that we can realistically get this stuff done. Now, Word is one option. I personally am a mad fan of Excel. I have a project management background, and the way my brain works, it works in project management kind of format. And so I love to use Excel. And I've given you an example here of Excel. Now, we have templates that we've set up that have, you know, drop down options where you can just click a little box and it drops down some options for you where it says, you know, this is in progress, and it makes the box orange. It's overdue, makes the box red. It's finished, it makes the box green. Loads of things. Now, I know there's some of you who are on this call that I have met with and talked to personally who would be absolute whizzes at Excel. And I'm sure that there are some people who are not fans of Excel. So work with whatever works for you. But personally, I love to use Excel because I can color code, and I get an instant picture of where things are up to and what's overdue. So what are the things that I need to pay attention to, and what's going to stop other things being done? But there's a couple of options. Excel also has some templates that you can use. So sort of, you know, pre-set up sort of templates that you can use. But there's, you know, loads of different ways that you can use it. So there's a couple of options. Some big organizations, more complex organizations, also use task management kind of platforms and software. I'm a real believer in simple and, you know, something that is pretty accessible to most people. So I've given you a couple of ideas there. I want to just leave you with this idea that the point of strategy is actually as much about choosing what not to do as it is about choosing what to do, okay? And the reason I say that is because it's very easy. I know from experience, I've spent many, many years working in the not-for-profit sector. I've also worked in really busy government roles, and, you know, as a consultant, I have to manage my own time really effectively. And it can be very easy to get caught up in a reactionary space where you know, we're just reacting to things that are going on. And when we do that, we're much less likely to work on strategy. So sometimes it's actually about choosing what not to do. So I'm not going to get caught up in just reactive work, or I'm not going to do the stuff that is really fun and takes a lot of my time, but doesn't actually achieve the result that we're trying to achieve with our plan. But instead, I'm choosing to do something that I know furthers the plan. So I really encourage you to think about, you know, what does that look like for you in the work that you do in your organisation and you personally. And that example I gave before, if somebody's coming running at you with an idea that could sound amazing and really exciting, do that little quick check-in. Is it aligned with our values? Is it aligned with our plan? Is this where we need to be spending our energy? I encourage, whenever I do a workshop with groups, particularly when it's online, I encourage you to think about what's one thing as a result of this little workshop that we've done today. What's one thing that you will do next or do differently? So make a little note for yourself so that the nearly hour, well, it will be an hour by the time we finish up, the hour that you've spent is hopefully not just a bit of interesting information, but also something that you can really use and put into practice. So I encourage you to do that. Think about what will you do differently and what will you do next. And this is just some information about us and our organisation. So you can find us easily online if you're looking for us, and you can find me on LinkedIn as well. And I'll hand back over to Gillian before we go to questions.
Thank you so much, Nicole. That was incredibly practical and insightful. So really grateful to you for your time. But yeah, just thought I'd give everyone a couple of minutes before we have to finish up. If there's any pressing questions that people would like to ask, please feel free to pop them in the chat.
You're also welcome if you've got a question and you just want to give us a shout out, then yeah, feel free to ask a question. You just have to take yourself off mute.
Nicole, a quick question occurred to me while you were going through the presentation, which I'd be interested in hearing from you about, is how you differentiate values to an organisation's purpose and mission. I realise that's probably quite a broad question, but is there any sort of quick tips that you can?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So your purpose or your mission is, what is the difference that you want to make in the world? Okay, so there's some great examples of mission statements and purpose statements that come to mind. I know that I think it's I'm trying to remember who the organisation is, but there's one. Oh no, I'm going to confuse who the organisation is, but their mission is to end poverty. Now I'm going to say, is that it's not Red Cross, it's not the Brotherhood of St. Lawrence, it's one of the really big not-for-profits.
World Vision, so maybe?
Yeah, but possibly. I think it's an Australian one. Anyway, so that's theirs. I think that at one point, I think one of the big sporting companies, maybe ASICS, their mission was to beat Nike. So, you know, your mission is going to depend on what it is that, you know, you want to do, and but it's really what's the difference you want to make in the world, and it's aspirational. Okay. So your mission or purpose doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to pass kind of the reality test. It can be, you know, like when we talk about ending world poverty, that's a big call, right? But that's where they're driving towards. Okay. That's their reason for existing. Okay. Your values are, what are the behaviors that you can expect from us? What will you see us doing? What is our commitment to you in terms of what we stand for and our behaviors that you will see us do, that will tell you that, you know, we're doing what we say we will do. Yeah? Yeah,
got it. Thank you.
Yes, the R in SMART can also be relevant. Yes, it can be, absolutely. So in SMART goals, the R can be relevant. Does anybody else want to ask me a question? Happy to answer questions about strategic planning, about values, SWOT, SMART goals, collaborating, stakeholder engagement, any of that stuff.
Nicole, it's just Miles here. Just to let you know that this Zoom session will close off at 2. So we will be...
Okay, beautiful. So we've got 2 minutes. You're on the countdown, peeps. You've got us for 2 minutes and that's it.
Julia,
Mary, sorry, what was that? Sorry.
It's Julia here. Could I please ask, you know, our purpose and our objectives in our constitution are basically play golf, hold competitions, entertainment, blah, 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 everything associated with golf and collaborating with golf associations. You know, we've just redone our strategy, and it's not as aspirational as I'd like, and I find it difficult. I guess that you've already given the answer. It doesn't have to pass the reality check, but it's really hard to voice something more exciting than we continue to play golf.
Look, I think, Julie, you make a really good point too, that is important, that your statement of purpose should also, be something that attracts people to your organisation. So, there's nothing wrong with it being fun. Like, it can be, we are all about fun and golf, whatever that is, right? So there's no reason that it can't be it can't be fun and engaging either. Now, by me, it's 2 o'clock and we haven't dropped off. So I'm going to assume that we're not going to get cut off immediately. So we'll just keep talking.
Oh, no, sorry, Nicole. No, we do actually have to go because this, in charity land, there's another call after this.
Okay,
but
no
thank
problem.
you so much. And we'll get the slides out with the YouTube link. I'm super grateful to you, Nicole, and to everyone who joined us today.
Perfect. No problems at all. And if just really quickly, somebody asked a question about how do you get your committee enthusiastic about strategic planning. We are running this session again. And so if you would like to, if there are people on your committee who weren't here today and you think, hey, maybe this would help them get enthusiastic, then tell them to come along to the next one.
Yeah, good call. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you all.